Okay, welcome back to True Eagle. Today, we are going to take a look at the first three rounds and try and come up with some positives and negatives and just try and analyse what we've seen. Obviously, the mood and the vibe amongst Eagles fans at the moment is not great. It's not great, but what I'm going to try and do with this channel is try and cut through mood and vibe a little bit and just try and analyse what I'm seeing. In my personal opinion, I think the mood and vibe has kind of been a reflection of the fact that maybe deep down, a lot of Eagles fans out there were expecting this year to be different. And maybe secretly, deep down, I was one of them. But at the same time, you got to be pragmatic about where we are. And what I'm going to try and do with this analysis is try and pick out things we're doing right and things that need to improve. And what's out there that is a little bit sensationalist and, what is probably bang on. The fact of the matter is, we've fallen down the ladder. We've fallen into a rebuild. I would go as far as to say we didn't fall into one, we face planted. Some clubs dip down and they bounce back up quite quickly. As opposed to us, we fell face first on the concrete and we are still dazed. Medical staff are still running to the field to see if we're showing signs of concussion, checking for broken bones. In some cases, that's been literal with our injury list over the last 2 years. But point being, this was always going to take some time. And the fact that we haven't fixed all of our issues in the first three rounds does not shock me, and it shouldn't shock you. So I guess we're going to try and cut through and just analyze to what extent is what we've seen so far acceptable. I'm not trying to make things seem rosy or anything like that. I think some people have misfired, I reckon, when they've directed that sort of criticism at me. I mean, it's okay to disagree with me, for sure. But to be honest, I don't really think I've been that positive. So, as it currently stands, we have lost 3 games to start the year. Port Adelaide, GWS, and the Western Bulldogs most recently. I'm going to start with some of the negative stuff we've seen to appease those who really just want to see that, apparently. And then I will go through some things that I think are positive, and then some just general observations I've made about the first 3 rounds of this season. So, what are the worst aspects of what we've seen so far? In no particular order. I think the biggest thing that's happening on field that's leading to these big losses is scores from turnover. Now, I don't have any stats on that specifically, but you can see as the play unfolds, it's opposition transition. So their ability to get from one end of the ground, from their deep 50 to their forward 50, quite easily. When the ball's in the contested part of the ground, we're doing okay. It's the outside ball where we're getting slaughtered. Like the clearances and contested possessions, those numbers are all good. We are just getting 100 less possessions on the outside than our opposition every week. And further to that, when they go end to end and they use speed, our defensive running just hasn't quite been up to scratch. And there has been some damning footage. I saw some of guys like Yo and Harley Reid and Tim Kelly against the Western Bulldogs most recently, and that they just weren't really putting a lot of effort into their defensive running. And it does look bad. But, it's hard as well without context. We don't know how often that's happening per game. We don't know how often it happens at good clubs. But it's fair to suggest that generally speaking, it's not quite good enough for where we're at right now. We're getting butchered in this particular respect. And to clarify what I mean by that, how often is it happening at other clubs? Obviously, we're doing it worse than any other club. I do realize that. I just meant more if you look hard enough, you can probably find Christian Petrarca doing the same thing. So therefore, the footage of Yo and Kelly specifically might not be indicative of their four-quarter efforts, because at the end of the day, they have been pretty damn good. Particularly Yo, more so Kelly in round 3. Cool, so we're getting butchered on transition. We already kind of knew that. The second one we have is the inside 50 count. Now, I looked this up on FootyWire, and the FootyWire stats are incorrect, so I went and found them myself. So we've had 44, 44, and 51 in our 3 games this year. Last year, our average was about 43, and this year so far, it's 46.33. Now, this is kind of both a positive and a negative. It's positive in the sense that it has improved, and we've had really tough opposition, which seems to get lost here. We are playing really good team so far, and it has improved. However, it's still quite poor against the AFL average, and it still is a negative. We're not getting the ball inside 50 enough, and we're also conceding way too many. I think GWS had 67 against us. The third one is the big margins, which has surprised you. And this is characterized by 2 things. Obviously, we're conceding a lot. Port Adelaide scored 120 against us. We conceded 108 to GWS, 106 to the Western Bulldogs. And I don't have any stats to back this up, but it does feel like there's a lot of goals late in quarters. I think it was 2 goals in the last minute against GWS, 2 goals in the last minute against the Bulldogs as well, I think. And that's just the final quarter, but I think generally speaking, our ability to close out quarters has really cost us on the scoreboard. And on top of that, our inability to score. So sometimes it's because of lack of inside 50s. In our most recent game against the Western Bulldogs, it certainly was not. We had 51 inside 50s, the same as them. And as I said in my post-game analysis, it was genuinely skill errors and terrible ball use going inside 50 that cost us in that particular game. But either way, not scoring enough and this is characterized as well by goalless quarters. Like the 2 games in a row, the second and third terms, we didn't kick a goal. That means for 4 out of the last 8 quarters, we haven't kicked a goal. That's horrific. On paper, absolutely. If I had to put a positive spin on that at all, I'd say, we're still conceding like 7 goals or 8 goals in a row. At least this time it's over a longer period of time. I know that sounds really silly, but like, against Carlton, I reckon we conceded 7 goals in about 10 minutes last year, let alone whatever Sydney piled on, let alone whatever Fremantle piled on. So I'd say particularly in the GWS and Bulldogs game, it wasn't so much that we were conceding goals fast and we were falling asleep. It was just that we couldn't score. We are also averaging just 6 goals a game, which is very average. And if I had to characterize this or describe, or even diagnose might be the word, why does this happen? So we've actually been a pretty bad inside 50 team for a number of years now. Like even sort of the back end of our successful years, I seem to remember a lot of games where we'd have less inside 50s, but our forward line would be so efficient that we kick a winning score. But you look at the quality of the forward line now, like 3 or 4 years ago, you had JK and Darling kicking 40 goals a year. For a start, Liam Ryan was in the team and playing consistently. You look at our front half now, like our forward 6, and there is not a lot of scoring potency. You take out Oscar Allen, you take out Liam Ryan, and that doesn't explain fully the low scores, but what was once a strength that allowed us to stay in games when we probably didn't deserve to be has now been completely mitigated. And this is more or less a talent deficiency. Take out Allen and Ryan. Who's our next most potent forward? Like Jack Darling's horribly out of form. Is it Jamie Cripps? Seriously. Don't get me wrong, I love Jamie Cripps, but you don't want him being a leading goal kicker at this rate. He could be. Next negative is skills/composure. Particularly, I think, the nature of our turnovers has left us horribly exposed defensively. And I do think, in both games, the nature of our turnovers, perhaps more so against GWS actually, where we turn over the ball in a critical position that subsequently just left us in an impossible position to try and defend. And therefore, the score piles up against us faster. And this leads to higher scores and therefore probably makes the score look a little bit worse than the way we played. Because I tell you what, I reckon we've had a lot of 76-point losses where we played way worse than we played yesterday. And I'm not trying to redress the 76-point loss as though it was good or acceptable even. I am just supporting the point that I think, those skill errors have genuinely led to us getting scored against faster. I think one thing that could be an element here is that in the preseason, I remember a lot of talk about Simo talking about how they just wanted to play front half footy, manic pressure, contest. To be fair, pressure and contest has improved. They have improved on that, but it kind of implied that skills weren't high up on the preseason agenda this year, and so far this season, particularly in rounds 2 and 3, that has been very evident. A couple more negatives. First of all, an over-reliance on a handful. Like, we're still getting a lot out of guys that are like 30. In particular, Elliot Yeo in the midfield and Jeremy McGovern down back. Now, these guys have missed a lot of football over the last couple of years. It's great to see them back contributing. Yeo was highlighted in that footage of, bad defensive running, but he is still doing a lot of work on the inside and in the contest and winning clearances very, very well. So he's still a net positive in the team, absolutely. But what makes this a negative is that, if we lose one of those players to injury or something, like touch wood, we're going to be horribly exposed. Would have loved to have seen a bit more impact from guys like Jimby and Long. I suppose we have to be patient. Second year players, but they haven't really influenced the games too much. Jimby had an okay round 2. And generally speaking, not enough out of our oldest and most experienced. So Gaff and Darling, we already know about. And I also think Tom Barras has had a pretty poor start to the year. So we need these guys to be contributing and making us a better team. And at the moment they are not. So we talk about some positive. One flows on from this Gaff and Darling point is we've got some selection integrity for the first time since 2021. Yeah, even in 2021, I remember us rushing players back. But nonetheless, we were finally in a position to drop a player on form. We did that with Andrew Gaff. We could do that with Jack Darling. He might be saved for the Oscar Allen injury, who knows. But that is a plus. You never want to be in a position where you cannot pick on form. And to be honest, that never really happens to football clubs except us over the last 2 years. Another positive is a better injury list, and I put /waffle development because obviously a healthier injury list not only improves the AFL team, it improves the waffle team. And it might not seem like a positive now because the results on paper have not been good. But I do think over time, there will be benefits to guys playing in the same team, being able to be picked on form. Likewise in the waffle, yeah, they lost the game, but I tell you what, it's better than having like 3 or 2 Cat B rookies in the waffle team last year where the results were worse. I'm just saying over time, this will hopefully give us some benefits and hopefully it will lead to improvement. As far as on-field stuff goes, clearances have been pretty good. We only lost by 5 to Port Adelaide, and we actually equaled with the Bulldogs in terms of clearances. The Bulldogs are a strong clearance side. I saw they were ranked 4th in the competition last year. Again, relying a little bit too much on a few, like Bailey Williams, Tim Kelly, Elliot Yeo. They've been pretty good in the clearances this year. So that's genuine improvement, whether you like it or not. Like the contested stuff, the clearances, the inside game, that's all well and good. The next thing I'll point out is we've clearly moved to a new, more modern game style. And anyone who tells you that they can't see a new game style just has forgotten like what we used to play like, or is just not watching closely, or they have some sort of confirmation bias. Like it is just obvious. We're playing faster. We're trying to play through the corridor more. The pressure's up. That is not at all a characteristic of even the successful West Coast side. We saw it in the first 3 rounds of last year, I thought, and then the injuries took hold and it completely evaporated. We didn't play any game style last year. So far, you can see us playing a particular way, and yeah, it hasn't come off. And yeah, it hasn't really come off. Like, we haven't won a game yet, but I would still rather be playing this more daring style. A few individuals I'll point out as positives. Yohan McGovern, like I said. Kelly's probably had 2 medium games and then a very good one against the Bulldogs for sure. I've talked about Jake Waterman already. We need more guys from this age bracket to step up, okay? And, Petruccelli's kind of shown it in bits. I think he had moments against the Bulldogs where he looked, good. And then there was other moments in that game where his composure let us down. And it's like, you've played 50 games now. We need you to be better. And a few promising signs from Cal Jamison. He might be the biggest positive out of the youngsters so far, in the sense that I didn't expect him to be good, and he's actually been pretty good, save for an error or 2 against the Western Bulldogs. He's doing some nice things. I don't even know if he qualifies as young anymore. I think he's 22 or 23, so for a key position player, that's about right. So I feel good about having him in the team. I think Brady Hoff has been pretty solid without being a standout, and Jack Williams as well coming back into the side, kicked the first goal for us, I think, against the Bulldogs. Give him some time, and I'm glad that he's in the team. The next positive is the list profile has gotten a lot younger. So let's talk specifics. So I've gone through the first 3 games of last year, and I think that's what we need to be comparing it to. Like, that's comparing apples with apples. How did we go this time last year? Now, you could look at it superficially and say, oh, we lost the game by 5 points. We beat GWS and we were pretty good in the derby until the injuries. And that is true, but the quality of opposition is so much higher in the first 3 games of this year. Let's be honest. Port Adelaide could be a top 4 team. We don't know. GWS I expect to be a top 4 team. The Bulldogs, obviously, they're not as proven. I think they'll play finals. Still a handy side. You compare that against North Melbourne, who came second last year. Admittedly, they played well that day. I thought we did as well. But nonetheless, it wasn't like we were playing a top 4 side or anything like that. GWS last year were not good. They were coming off a year where they just finished 3rd last. And then some of the other results that they had around us beating them was they lost to Essendon. They beat the Hawks by 2 points. They lost to the Dogs at Manuka. They lost at home to Carlton and St Kilda. And then they played Collingwood and got smacked. So the point being, the team that emerged in the second half of the year was very different to the first half of the season. So we're not comparing apples with apples there. If you say like, oh, well, we got 80 points less when we played GWS this time, it's like, yeah, that's kind of on them as well. They've improved massively, absolutely no doubt. And then the Bulldogs are a little bit hard to quantify. Like, so far they look pretty solid this year. I'd say top 8 side, which is, far exceeded what Fremantle were 12 months ago. So looking at like how many games we've won, how much we've lost by is a little bit superficial. And I do think there's some people out there falling into that trap. Some other points is, we've gotten a lot younger since we played these games. So since we played the Giants in round 2 of last year, the team that took them on this year was a whole year and a half younger on average, which is quite a lot. The games experience dropped from 117 to 85. That's enormous. Last year we had 6 players with under 50 games experience playing that game. This time we had 10. Last year we had 5 players that were 200 plus gamers. This time it was only 2. And so all in all, I think, looking at how much we lost by is just a really superficial way of looking at it. You got to look deeper at some of the KPIs and things we're looking at and factors that lead to us losing by more and factors that lead to us losing by less. And you got to pick apart some of this is good and some of it's bad. Like I said, tough first 3 weeks of the season. It's going to get worse against Sydney. I'm an optimist, but it's not going to go well this weekend. I thought Lee Matthews made a really interesting point. He brings up the hope/energy connection, and I think this is just true of life, right? Which means that the more hope you have, the more energy you're going to have in trying to pursue a goal, right? If you believe you can achieve the goal, you will naturally try harder. That is just psychology. I find it true in my life. And I'm a little bit worried that, if this outside external negativity gets to the players, if their confidence dips from this tough start to the season, where they've played some pretty tough teams, lost by about the margin you'd expect a wooden spoon side to lose by, then I am worried that we could see what happened, in the middle of last year, where I think the biggest factor was we lost hope, we lost belief that it mattered to try. We just need to avoid getting demoralised, because that will be a key factor. If we can keep the spirit high and the energy high, and the players have a positive attitude, that is much more conducive to them improving than necessarily them buying into all the negative hype right now. Just to tie off the difficulty of fixture, think about how many teams would be winless right now if they had our fixture. I think Hawthorn would have lost to all of Port Adelaide away, GWS and the Bulldogs away. I think North Melbourne would have, Essendon, Gold Coast, perhaps even Fremantle, certainly Adelaide on current form. Without even really thinking about it, I just named 6 teams. Now, I do get the difference here is obviously we're losing by more than you'd expect some of those teams to lose by. But Gold Coast did get smacked by the Bulldogs, not by as much as us, but they still got smacked. Hawthorn played Melbourne, lost by 65 points. We're not that far off where you should expect us to be, in my opinion. More comes down to your expectations rather than me being a massive optimist. I've been an Eagles fan for a while now, 20 years, and spent a lot of that online, Big Footy, now YouTube. And you get an interesting variety of Eagles fans. And this is true of all fans. It's normal to be frustrated and upset and, disappointed with where we're at. I don't quite strongly feel all those emotions at the moment. Maybe a little bit of disappointment. But there's people out there. And I don't mean anyone who's criticised the club, but there's genuinely people out there who will just come in and fire up and want to just sack everyone. And not only that, they want to make you feel bad for not being as angry as they are about the result. I've seen it time and time again over the last 20 years of being a fan. And what's funny? It's easy for them to make those claims now. They're a wooden spoon side. We're a rebuilding team. They're still going to be saying those things when we're 4th last. They're going to be saying these things when we're 10th. They're going to be saying these things when we're 6th. They're going to be saying these things when we're 2nd. And you know what they always say when we start winning flags? Absolutely nothing. These people tend to disappear. And that says everything you need to know about these people. Again, I'm not talking about anyone who's criticised the club. I've had a brief look at the comments on the Bulldogs-Eagles game. A lot of frustrated fans. I get that. It's not directed at everyone who's criticising the club. I'm just saying there's people out there who are never going to be happy. So just try and be a bit happier. Anyway, this has been True Eagle. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.